Hi, continuing our discussion of table views, now we're going to see what happens when we tap a cell on a table view and how we would get another view controller to display some detail about the cell that we're tapping. So the first task we must do is set up a new view controller. And we've done that here, and I've just set its view's background color to a green color. And then I also have a UI label control here that is centered and very large, and it's got a system font of size 72 with a black color. What I'm going to do is when I tap a cell 1, 2, or 3, I'm going to display the digit that corresponds with that number. So now let's recall what we've got inside our table view controller at this point. We've got our NS array, here we go, with cell content of 1, 2, and 3. We've initialized, and then after view did load and did receive memory warning, we've got our table view data source functions or methods here. Number of sections in table view is still 1, and the number of rows in section is still self.cellcontent.count. Cell for row at index path is the cell in that, or the element in that NS array that corresponds with the index path dot row in the table view. So all of this we've had before. Let's go back and look at our storyboard again. What we've done here is that we have control clicked on the cell prototype and then dragged. We've held down control and clicked and dragged to this new view controller. And that will give us a segue. And this segue is a push segue. We are pushing a new view controller onto this navigation controller. I've given this segue a identifier, and that identifier here is detail. So this will give us a segue to hook into in our table view controller so that we can use the prepare for segue sender method to prepare what's in this new view controller. This view controller, if I look at detail view controller, that view controller now has a custom class that we have right here, detail view controller. So now let's look at the detail view controller class. In detail view controller, I have two properties. One is an outlet, and it is just that label, the display. And the other property is a string that will back that label. I can't, in prepare for segue, I can't get to an outlet property because the view hasn't loaded yet. But I can put a property of the class in. So I can set a string, and then in view did load in the detail view controller, we will copy that string into the label's text field. So let's look at detail view controller.m, and this is where that happens. Self-display.text is equal to self-numeral. So until the view loads, I can't set self-display.text, but I can set it after the view loads, and that's what we're doing here in view did load. So now in the table view controller, how do I get the action to bring up this new view controller and to populate that numeral field? Well, in non-storyboard applications, we would use the method table view did select row at index path. But in a storyboard, we have to use prepare for segue sender. So let's go down and look at that. Here is prepare for segue sender. And we see that the first argument is a UI storyboard segue, and the second is the sender. The first thing we need to do is check to see if the sender's identifier, if the segue's identifier is equal to our detail. And why are we doing this? We don't even need an identifier if we only have one segue. But if we have multiple segues from one view controller, then we will need to have an identifier set up for each segue so we can distinguish between the segues and know which control the user hit. So we always put an identifier there to keep us from forgetting that detail, and we just check to see which identifier the user has hit. So here, if segue.identifier is equal to the string detail, then we can go ahead and process this segue. The detail view controller needs to be downcast because segue.destination view controller comes back as a UI view controller, not as the class that it actually is. So we downcast this UI view controller, segue destination view controller, we downcast it to a detail view controller, and we just called that detail VC. Then we get the cell, which is the tap cell, which is the sender. So the sender actually is the cell that the user tapped. Now we can pull the title for the detail view controller from that tap cell's text label text. Now we need to set the digit, which is self.numeral, or detail view controller.numeral, detail VC.numeral in this case. We get that from the index path for the cell that is sendered, and then we get the row and we add 1. Remember that the index path is 0 indexed, and so is the array, our cell content array. So when we add 1, we know that the 0th index of that cell content array is going to be the character string 1, and then the first index is 2, and the second index is 3, so we add 1 to justify those up. And then I have logged out that digit. We don't need to do that. And then we set the numeral property into a string with the format and then the digit. And that's it. So now when we run, when we tap on one of these particular cells, 1, 2, or 3, in the next view controller, we will get the digit that corresponds with 1, 2, or 3. So let's start with 3. Here's where we set the title. It's 3, and that comes directly from this character string right here, this NS string. So this is 3, but then the digit is set to 3. If I go back and tap some other field, it is 1, and this string is 1, and so forth. Here's 2. And so this is how we display a detail view controller. Now, of course, we aren't limited to displaying only one piece of information. We could display as much information, as much detail out of that array as we could. For example, as we wanted to, I should say. For example, if we had set up an NS dictionary and it was a dictionary of keys and values, we could put the keys here in our table view, and the values could be arrays containing a great deal of information that we could display here in our detail view controller. So this is a very, very typical pattern we find over and over again in iOS. This detail view controller could be another table view, and then we could have another table view, and so on and so forth. We find this kind of thing very frequently as we're developing for iPhone in iOS. Thank you very much.